This is our second year to host this event, and it's always obviously a pleasure to have this group here. I want to thank Ibuchi-san and the team for putting this together. I also want to thank the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs for sponsoring it. Again, as they have, I guess this is the third year. And most of all, obviously, I want to thank the participants for being here tonight. There is really not much to say about the kind of experiences they have had, and obviously we will leave it to them to speak about those things. But as someone who's been in Japanese studies for many, many years now, it is always, I think, the most interesting and important thing is how the Japan of 70 years ago and the Japan of today differ or don't differ. So it's great to have this kind of lens for us to look back in the past and reflect on that as to what Japan is today. So without any further ado, we will get started. I think what we're going to do is to have each of the participants say a few words and then open up to the audience. Is that right, Robert?
Yes, and there'll be lots of questions, obviously, and we'd like to thank the Defense Department schools for coming in such large numbers.
Yes, and so, Robert, do you have anything to say?
No, brevity is a soul of wit, Bruce, so thank you for the introduction. Sir, if you want to start. Thank you, sir.
Oh boy.
Joan, sit down. Sit down.
Sit down. Well, I want to thank the
A little bit close to your
I
mouth.
want to thank Temple University. The food was good and the hospitality has been superior. I really enjoyed it. My name is Joan. My family came from Spain originally to California, from southern Spain. I enlisted in the service in 1941, and I went to the Philippines. I could have gone to a worse place, but I was there. I was a photographer on a B-17, and one day we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. We got up and we got the planes off the ground, flew them around all morning, and we came down for lunch. And then you know what happened next. 50 Japanese bombers came over and they destroyed every plane on the ground. Every hangar, they got everything. And there we were without a plane with practically nothing. Then we heard we were going to retreat to Bataan. Well, of course, I had never heard of Bataan, but so we retreated to Bataan. They were supposed to have food and ammunition there. And of course, we got to Bataan. There was no food and no ammunition, nothing. So there we were. We ate all the horses, all our animals, and one day they said we're going to surrender to the Japanese. And I still had never seen a Japanese soldier. We were up on Mount Marvelous, and so we walked down to the ocean there, across from Pregador, and there they were. I made the death march, 65 miles. 65 miles, no food, nothing. If you fell out, they shot you. It's very simple. And of course, I was 19 years old. I was young enough to survive and kept going. And from there, we went to the first camp, and Camp O'Donnell. Well, this was a terrible place. You cannot believe. Got there were bodies lying next to the barracks, just lying there in the sun, bloated. The stench was. And I said to myself, John, you're going to die if you stay in this place. So I volunteered for a work detail, and I went right back to Bataan. I worked for the Japanese there, fixing roads and so forth. Got malaria. It was so bad. Of course, I couldn't work any longer. So they sent me back to the new camp, Cabana Tuan. And the rumor there was that if you got new clothing, you were going to go to Japan. Japan needed workers. Of course, all their men were in the service. So one day my name was on the list. I got new clothing and put on a ship, and I'm going to Japan. Well, I'll tell you a little story here. This is really unusual. We stopped in Formosa. Taiwan was called Formosa then. And we got supplies there, onions and fresh fruit. And while we were there, one of the fellows came down with an appendix problem, Joe Quintero. Well, this is a large city, a couple million people there. The American officers wanted to take him to a hospital there. The Japanese said no, couldn't go to the hospital. They'd have to operate on the ship. Well, one of the problems was we didn't have an MD. We had a veterinarian. So he rigged up these life rafts in the bottom of the hull. We're up on the deck looking down. They put up these lights. He took a razor blade and he cut down in the appendix. He took a spoon, he bent the handle and dipped the appendix out, and he cut him. Now we're up there looking down on this scene, and it's almost unbelievable. But Joe survived. The next day we left for Japan. Of course, we hit a storm, and the boat was going like this, and I could hear Joe groaning and moaning. Oh, it was terrible. Well, Joe really lucked out. He got to Japan, he never had to go to work. He stayed in the hospital. We had a hospital there in Niigata, with no medicine and 3 doctors. And so Joe was made an orderly in the hospital, so he never had to go to work. I worked for Randall Coal there. We worked every day, got 1 day off a month. It started snowing on Thanksgiving. I'd never seen snow before. I was raised in Southern California, and of course we worked in the outside every day, loading coal ships. And so that's part of my story, and I think that I wanted to mention the Joe Quintero story, because it's really a unique story, and it's almost unbelievable. And but I saw it, and I witnessed the operation, and Joe survived. Joe died here a couple years ago. He was with the 200 Coast Artillery, lived in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Doug Northam, and it's good to be here with you tonight. One of the things that sustained us when we were in prison camp, being mistreated, was a sense of humor. And any small thing that would happen that had a potential of humor, we dwelt on it for days, telling each other the story over and over. But a couple of incidents that happened that shows the spirit of human beings offering help to those who are in dire need. In December of 1944, near Christmas time, and Christmas being an important holiday for us Americans, we were faced with a time that, well, sad time. But one of the Japanese workers that we worked with, and a fellow we called the truck honcho, he supervised the loading and unloading of trucks at the freight station where we worked. He was on vacation. He took time off from his own pursuits with his family and showed up at noontime at our workstation with 2 bottles of beer. There were 18 of us in that work section, and 2 bottles of beer, we each got about 2 swallows. But the thing that was most impressive was that he took time off to offer a little hope, a little bright spot for us who were in dire need. And we all appreciated that gesture much more than we appreciated that beer. However, while I'm here, I do want to have a bottle of Asahi beer. And one other incident happened in 1945, June or July, I don't remember which, in Saruga. The Americans did a bomb raid, firebomb raid in Saruga, and it burnt the city down. And we were right in the middle of that firestorm. The building we were housed in was burnt down. There was confusion everywhere, fire everywhere. We were all running here and there, trying to dodge the fire. And we POWs scattered. There was 300, 350 of us. We scattered all over the place. I wound up down by the bay, down by the water, where it was a little bit safer from the fire. But the bombing raid finally ended, and there were 4 or 5 POWs who found themselves in a residential neighborhood where all the houses were on fire. And the people who owned those houses were running in and out of their house, making sure their children were out and trying to save some of their meager belongings. And without hesitation, these POWs stepped in and went in those houses and helped them recover some of their belongings. And it shows that the human spirit will always offer help to someone who is in dire need. And that shows me that the atmosphere that exists today between the Americans and the Japanese was on its way. And we appreciate the fact that we are now allies with the Japanese. Thank you.
My name is Dave Parkhorn. I was a top gunner on a B-29, and all these other people up here were POWs for 3.5 years. I was a POW for 3.5 months. We did fire raids, burning down houses, and we did general purpose bomb raids, blowing up factories. We did radar search missions, looking for ships at sea, so we could plot their exact location on a map so that we could lay mines and blow the ships up. And I'm trying to think the other, we all did all these different missions. I flew 18.5 missions altogether. And the last mission, when we were shot down, we were flying over Tokyo, burning the place up. And our plane left wing got hit. It was set on fire. We flew across Tokyo Bay. We landed in a little town right across the bay and out in the country. And we were picked up within days. One person stayed out there about 8 days before he was picked up. He ran out of food. He was drinking the water out of the rice paddies, and he was about to starve to death. They took us to a little jail. We stayed overnight in a little local jail. The Army came and picked us up. They took us downtown. They put us in the infamous captivity headquarters, which is right next to the Imperial Palace. And fortunately, we weren't put in the dungeon cells under the captivity building, but we were put in something called the horse stalls, which was converted into 6 cells. And we were treated there as not POWs, but special prisoners. POWs were people that were captured fighting the Japanese, but anybody that burned up their houses, killed their children, killed their families, and lost all their goods were special prisoners. And the way we were treated, we were on half rations. Half of what the regular prisoners got, we only got half that much. And we were told that we were all going to be killed. And so anyway, days and months went by. Like I say, I was there about 3.5 months. And August 15th came. And the colonel in charge of the captivity prison told them to kill all the prisoners. And the lieutenant colonel underneath the colonel said, no, we'd be better off with live prisoners. So they took about 150 of us. They moved us on August 15th over to Omori, which was a little island just below here, and they put us in with the other prisoners of war. But we were still called special prisoners, not regular prisoners. And but at Omori we got regular food, just like the other prisoners did, which helped. We also had to go out and take all our clothes off. They took our clothes in and boiled them to kill all the fleas and lice, and then they threw them in a big pile. And so here all these 150 naked people were out there looking for the clothes with their names and initials on. On August 28th, before the police, the surrender was even signed, they came in and released all the prisoners from that camp. We were the first camp in all of Japan to be released. And we were taken to a wonderful brand new hospital ship called the USS Benevolence. And they took away our clothes and got rid of them. And they issued the clothes they had. And so I went from the Army to the Navy, because the only kind of clothes they had were Navy. And so anyway, we came home in Navy clothes. And every time they had a chance to stop, they would stop at another hospital to check to make sure everybody was still alive and doing okay. And fortunately, I had a friend on this USS Ozark, which was a landing ship vehicle. And on the way home, my friend would go get me a whole box of chocolate bars about every other day. And so when I got home, we went from hospital to hospital to hospital. I got out of the Army early, got back on the GI Bill, went to college, and graduated. Thank you.
My name is Randall Edwards. I was a little bit different than these other gentlemen. I was in the U.S. Navy. I was on the USS Canopus in Manila Bay when the war started. We heard at 2 o'clock in the morning of December the 8th that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. The next day, we also saw the Japanese planes over Manila, Nichols Field, where they destroyed all of the P-40 bomb fighter planes. And we did not see the destruction at Clark Field, but all of the B-17s were destroyed there. We were told that we should be prepared for invasion of the Philippines. We were. Shortly after the bombing of the Navy Yard in Cavite, they bombed the Canopus. We were sent from there to Marvelis Harbor at the bottom of Bataan. We were the sacrificial lamb of the Asiatic Fleet to remain and service our 29 submarines. We were the mothership for those 29 submarines. The Canopus did service those submarines up until April the 7th of 1942, 2 or 3 days before Bataan was surrendered. We were bombed many times. I left the Canopus at the request of the Army to help them up on Bataan. I was on Bataan until April the 9th. The last orders I got from the Army were, you were on your own. I had a choice. A Filipino says, maybe I can get you through the Japanese lines, or I could go back down and join the Navy on the Canopus. I got down to where the Canopus was, and she's out there in the middle of the bay sinking. And there was a whole bunch of cherry pies we could see up on the deck, but we couldn't get to them. But we managed to get over to Corregidor. We were put on beach defense with the 4th Marines. The next month on Corregidor was probably as close to hell you'll find on earth. The Japanese lined up all of their artillery over on Bataan, which is only a mile away from Corregidor. They put it over on the Batangas side, which is a little farther away. And we were bombed every day, and the shells flew in, and they would break from one end of Corregidor to the other end of Corregidor. On the 29th of April, yes, the 29th of April, the Japanese came on the Manila radio and said, we are going to celebrate the Emperor's birthday. And they did. One of the guys on where we were said he counted 900 separate gun flashes coming from Bataan and from Batangas. The island just disappeared in dirt and dust and debris. A goodly number of people were killed, but it didn't do a bit of good. On May the 6th of 1942, General Wainwright surrendered not only Corregidor, but all the rest of the Philippine Islands. We became not prisoners of war, unfortunately. We became prisoners. A month later, around about the 1st of October, after we got off Corregidor and everything, we were pulled out of Cabanatuan 1 by name, rank, and serial number, and loaded on a ship headed somewhere. We didn't know where. But the Japanese knew more about us than probably our own officers did, of who they wanted. And we found out later that we had been contracted as slave laborers to a machine tool factory, Japanese machine tool factory in Mukden, Manchuria, called MKK. I'm not sure what the MKK stands for. I've heard that the M stands for Mitsubishi, and maybe London. Well, as slaves, we had absolutely no rights under the Geneva Convention or anything else. And the worst part of that entire 3.5 years was put in prison camp was not the beatings, not the hits, clubbed over the head, rifle jammed in your back, knocked down, kicked in the groin, stomped on, what have you. That was not really the worst part of it. The worst part of that entire part of my life was the complete loss of freedom. Absolute, complete loss of freedom. And if you can feature a Japanese guard standing in front of you, hitting you with his open hand, punching you in the face, kicking you in the groin, and you cannot resist. Why can't you resist? Because there's a little, another Japanese guard standing behind you with an open bayonet, hoping that you will raise your hand against the guy hitting you. The operation was repeated a goodly number of times. And then all they had to do is raise your hand and you were dead. They had the Japanese mindset at that time was they were going to be the rulers of the world and they could do no wrong. But anyway, that is the problem. What did we do in Mucton? We built a machine tool factory. We made 93 Brown and Sharp 1923 model automatic screw machines. We did the job so well that at the end of the war, 56 of those machines were sitting back in the factory. They wouldn't run. We did everything that we could in the entire period to see that the Japanese did not win the war. We knew and were told by the two interpreters in the camp, one by the name of Noda, one by the name of Kawashima. Noda was born and raised in Los Angeles. Kawashima, born and raised in Hawaii. That if the Americans invaded Honshu, we were to be exterminated. Well, we knew that the Americans were going to have to invade Honshu if they ever defeated Japan. We followed the war all the way up through the Pacific by stealing a Japanese newspaper. We had an English officer in the prison camp that could translate the Japanese newspaper. And I remember one particular story when the Americans retook Guam out in the Pacific. The Americans lost 5 battleships, 7 aircraft carriers, and 800,000 men retaking Guam. Well, we knew that was nonsense, because that was more Navy ships than we had in the whole Navy when the war started. But we knew that the Americans were coming. That's the reason we didn't care what we did in that factory. We stole the Japanese sake. We replaced their sake in their big wooden tubs with water, and they were very, very unhappy. They were not mad at us. They didn't know we were getting. They thought the Army was shortchanging them on their sake. Another lovely incident, there was a boxcar load of sausage-type meat came into the factory. It was supposed to be for the Army, of course. It wasn't for the civilians or anything. But it is midwinter. The snow is deep. And we had to unload that, and we did unload it. And we buried as much as we could in the snowbanks and everything. The Japanese civilians were filling their desk drawers with the meat, and everything was, you know, everybody was hungry. The next spring, when the snow started melting, there would be a little sausage pop up out of the snow. Whoever got to it first, it was his. But our ration the first winter was Chinese cabbage soup, period. We lost 250 men the first winter out of the 1,200 that were there. So you can see the conditions were quite harsh. The Japanese brought in a team of doctors to find out why we were dying, because we were supposed to build a factory. We were slave laborers, we're contractors. The doctors concluded, you're starving them to death. So they shifted it from cabbage soup to soybean soup. We ate soybeans for the next 3 years. But they were nutrition. We boiled them for 12 hours, we soaked them for 12 hours. The end of the war came in a peculiar way for us. We were standing out just about dark, it was still sunset, and we saw a bunch of colored parachutes coming out of a strange-looking airplane over on the edge of the water, or the airfield over there. Well, that night, our spies in the Japanese compound saw an American colonel sitting with his butt on the Japanese colonel's desk. So we knew that that was not kosher. The next morning, they lined us all up and they said the war was over. And you would have thought there would be a lot of cheering and hollering and everything. But you could have heard a pin drop in that entire compound. There was not a word said. We wandered back around and I guess it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon before I realized really that the war was over and we might get out of there. Eventually, they loaded us back on a train, took us to Port Arthur on a Navy ship, took us into Buckner Bay in Okinawa, and on the way we blew the bottom out of the ship and we hit a Japanese mine. There was a Marine killed on there after going through these 3.5 years of hell, was blown up on the way home. They stuffed us in a compound on Okinawa for several weeks, trying to fatten us up. At least I think that's what it was. I was one of the more healthy ones in that entire camp. And in a Japanese Kirin brewery with a Russian soldier, I weighed 44 kilograms. I finally got back to the States in November, stayed in the Navy, retired from the Navy, went to the University of Florida, got a degree in electrical engineering, and worked at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where the material for the atomic bombs were made, on fusion research, trying to put the sun in a bottle. Thank you.
I'm Robert Earhart. I joined the Marines in 1940 when I was 17 years old. Spent about 6 months in the States training, and was then sent. We were supposed to go to China and relieve the Marines there, but the war clouds were pretty bad at that time, and we were sent to the Philippines. I spent there about 6 months before the war started. I was in Marvellis at the time. When we heard that Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and so I spent just a short period of time in action on the Bataan Peninsula when MacArthur decided the Marines would be sent to beach defense and Corregidor and the adjacent islands. So, and I was immediately, we were immediately sent to Corregidor. Oh, okay, sure. We were sent to Corregidor the day before the first bombing of Corregidor. And we were, at the time, we were told, oh, don't worry, those barracks are all bomb-proof. Well, of course, they were thinking about World War I, and I don't know what size bombs, but I went up the second floor and went to sleep. Next morning, the planes started coming. Well, the first bomb that hit near our particular area went through the ceiling, came to the second floor, to the bottom floor, and burst in the basement. I was in a room just next to where that came through, hiding behind my mess kit. And that was the introduction to the war. Well, we were sent over to a little island next to it called Fort Hughes, where we were. I think he made a very good description here about the bombing, because we watched the first bombing that hit Corregidor. They hadn't hit Fort Hughes yet, and believe me, he was exactly right. The island totally disappeared in fire and dust. And we looked at each other and we said, my God, we're next. And we were. Well, we held out for about a month after Bataan fell. And then the Japanese came aboard and we were shifted to Cabanatuan. Now, we didn't make a death march like that, but we were stacked in. We had a shorter march along Dewey Boulevard where they Filipinos lined up and were cheering us and getting beat up for it. And but anyhow, and then we packed into boxcars. And we packed in so tightly that when a man died, he didn't fall. He couldn't fall. We were just stuck in there. Fortunately, I had a place near the corner where I could get a crack where I could breathe. And some people practically suffocated in that damn thing. When we opened Cabanatuan, there was nobody there at the time. It was just a bunch of little barracks and we built it up. And at first we worked the farm. And the farm, the vegetables and good stuff all went to the Japanese side, and they ate it. We had the tops of the potatoes and the tops of the different stuff that no skins and hoofs of the one we were lucky when good days, maybe a month, and once a month we'd get some of the hooves and eyeball pieces of the caramel. But the worst detail on there, I was on a burial detail for three months solid, not a day off, and it was the most gruesome thing you could imagine because the bodies we couldn't catch up. They were dying 40 a day, and the bodies were getting kind of ripe, and we had to haul them about a couple of miles to the graveyard where they actually bulldozed a trench where and it was sad because here were American soldiers, Marines, and sailors. We had to dump them in the graves. And that was probably the worst detail I was ever on. It wasn't the most grueling or hard one, but it was a terrible, terrible detail. After about a year, less than a year in Cabanatuan, we were transferred on the Tagamaru. It was a freighter. We were locked in the hole with the hatches locked above us, and very little air. And we were in it was like sardines, from head to toe, cramped in the hole. And it got kind of ripe in there. And we were allowed up on deck, maybe about once a week or something, and we get shorted about a canteen cup of water, and we could bathe. Well, the trip was about a month, I guess. And then when we landed we stopped in Formosa and loaded some fuel and stuff. And when we took off from there, we were about a day or so out from Formosa when all the engines stopped and the lights went out all on the ship. And we could just hear the waves lapping against it. And all of a sudden there was a big boom that hit the side of the ship. We'd evidently had taken a torpedo. The torpedo was a dud because fortunately ours was one of the early ships and they still had World War I torpedoes. And a very small percentage of them actually detonated. And that's another thing too. The equipment that we had was all World War I equipment, and which is another reason that we couldn't hold out any longer. We ran out of ammunition, we ran out of food, and our water was tainted. But anyhow, from Cabanatuan, we landed in Japan, and we had a marvelous, really great train ride from our landing to Sakurajima camp in Osaka, where we were used as slave laborers in the it was a Hitachi shipyard where we worked on. I was a riveter on tankers mostly, although we did also work on corvettes, military vessels, which we were not supposed to. I mean, according to the law, we were not supposed to. Prisoners were not to work on military equipment. I was in Osaka for about a year or so, when the planes came over and absolutely destroyed the shipyard and burned Osaka. It looked just like Hiroshima. The only difference, Hiroshima took just practically an instant. This took overnight. The fire burned right up to our camp. We were fortunate. We were on a sort of a little island, and it burned out to the edge of the island. And then we spent about a week or so cleaning up and helping tear down some of the buildings that were dangerous. And then we were shipped to Akinobi. In Akinobi, we worked in mines. And we didn't go down in the mines. We went up into the center of the mountain. We were mining copper. I was a driller. And the driller had a drill that weighed 75 pounds. I weighed 90 pounds, 98 pounds. And of course, we didn't have to lift it very far, but we'd have to lift it up, and then you poke the drill bit into the mountain, and you pneumatically work it. So my arms were pretty well beat up, and right today, my shoulders are still giving me pain. But well, we worked in those mines until, I guess it was around August 15th when the hostilities ceased. We knew that things were getting good, getting in our favor, because the air raids weren't going anymore for the last couple of weeks. And we didn't hear any B-29s, and the guards finally left our camp. And but we stayed in the camp for, well, some of the fellows took off, but I said I'm not. We were cautioned by we had one officer, Dennis, I believe, and he said, he cautioned us. He said, you might get killed going on the way to the coast. So I wasn't going to get killed. I stayed there. Well, we weren't crazy about the Air Force, but one day this plane comes flying over, and we were in a kind of a V, the mountains on the side of us, and we were down in the valley between them. And this damn pilot took that B-17 and he dove that thing down, and he just bombed us with parachutes, with food, and you couldn't believe it. I mean, and again, some of the guys were so crazy they ate the candy and they ate this stuff and got sick. and we were waiting. The surrender wasn't complete until September 2nd. And so from August 15th to September, we were in this particular state. Well, the galleys we took in over the warehouse, cooked rice 24 hours a day, you could go in and get food whenever you wanted. We had this American food that had been brought to us, and we were gorging ourselves, and it was pretty good. Yeah, and we opened the gates, and because the people outside were starving, and we allowed the Japanese to come in, and we fed them as well. So after we got the word that the war was definitely over, we commandeered a train, and we wound up in Yokohama, and from there, an airplane to Guam, and then back on those damn Navy ships. which was infinitely better than the hell ship that we took into Japan. But anyhow, we finally wound up at home.
Well, my name is George Summers, and I was a Marine on Guam. But before I say anything, after you've heard and listened to my fellow prisoners of war, I really look back at things now, and I really had a ball as a prisoner of war. The only thing that I had was nothing but starvation, because all I ever got was a rice ball and a daito once a day, and that's all we ever ate. But I want to say, while I'm here today, as you have mentioned, that you heard of the tribulations that everyone has had, but we're here today to promote the friendship with the Japanese. The object is because we were never really recognized as prisoners of war. We were never apologized to by the Japanese. We never got any restitution or money from the companies that we worked for. And we thank Douglas MacArthur for that, and Doug because he said there'd be no retribution, and consequently we went back to our homes and never got a thing until we begged our own government to finally give us something. So, but anyway, we're here today to promote the friendship with Japan, to tell them to forget the old days, and for you, the new people that are here today, to listen and change their minds if they ever tried to go back to their old days. But in the old days, you heard how Japan was. It was just a nation that only wanted to have victory. And in order to have victory, you had the spoils. You saw what they did in China and everywhere else. And now, me and Guam, we kept getting things that things was going to be getting worse and worse. And the fact is, we were only 60 miles away from a naval base the Japanese had by the name of Saipan. That was their huge naval base. And here we were 60 miles away from them. But anyway, dawn came early that day of December the 8th, came slowly over the palm trees of Guam, and I was out there with my short pants and khaki shirt with my rifle on, and here I heard a plane come right on over. And next thing I know, boom, boom, and crash, there went all the oil storage tanks that was in the lower town of Sumai. And here came the people from Sumai streaming by the hundreds, right on up the hill where I was guarding a construction camp. And here the Jap came over and started machine gunning me. And they just wanted to follow along the road, and I was telling them, get back into the coconut grove, get back into the coconut grove and sit over there. And me and I was on one end of the camp, and my fellow Marine named Chapel was on the other end. And we sat there and waited, and no one came to relieve us. Nobody told us what to do. The next thing you know, the Jap came again, and then this time he dropped a bomb right on top of the Marine barracks. And there was a friend of mine who lost his whole leg in there, and I was right close to it, and I got shrapnel in my leg. But I told Chapa and the other guy, well, where in the heck is all the other Marines? They've all disappeared. So he and I just took off and went into the jungle. I stayed there for 10 days, but on the shrapnel that I got in my leg started swelling, it was double the size. So I said, what the heck, I got nothing to do here, but I just have to give up. I can't stay out here. I'm starving to death anyway. The only thing I could drink was a coconut juice. So then I said, let's get the heck out of here, let's go find out, and let's get back to our barracks. So on the way over there, the next day, as soon as we got close enough to the barracks, I could see a sentry over there with a machine gun. The next thing you know, he pointed the machine gun right at us and he shot it right at our feet. So he and Chapa and I just rushed back into the jungle again. We stayed there in a little while. Pretty soon we heard crackling and things falling down. And the next thing we know, we had a Shamoran there who was loading up his cart with coconuts. And he says, oh my God, what are you people doing here? There's an order out that anyone who is still out was going to be shot on sight. I said, that's probably why the guy shot at you, but you're lucky he just got you at your feet. So we said, let's get behind this coconut guy here, and let's get him to go up toward the barracks and let's wave our skivvy shirts for surrender. And sure enough, the sentry picked us up now, and he brought us into the colonel that was there. And the colonel surprised me because I thought we were going to get killed or something, but instead he says, oh, you guys are heroes, you stayed out. And that's what you're supposed to do. And he would give us corned beef and cabbage and rice, all we could eat. And he says, the following day I'll take you back to the church on the canyon there where your companions are. And we went over there to the church, stayed over there and starved to death, getting nothing but a piece of meat and a little bit of gravy we got, but also came first. And we got hardly anything. But anyway, after a while, we got orders to, while I was in there, the Jap looked at my leg, and he just running and took his bayonet, and he just opened up my leg and pulled out the shrapnel, and then he bandaged it up, and then he gave me some injections, and then when I passed my urine, it was nothing but red, and that was some kind of antibiotic, I guess, I don't know, but anyway, my leg leaked from that time, from that day on, even though I never did, I had to go to work, and I just got bandaged a little bit, but my leg leaked to the end of the war. But anyway, we finally landed, we got onto the Argentina Maroon. We were loaded in there with all the Marines and also the Navy personnel. And we were all dumped right into a hold over there. It was really sticky and everybody was just stuck in there and everybody stunk and everything else. And we were freezing to death because it was cold and they were throwing rice balls at us and some of it even had maggots in it. But anyway, lucky enough for us, it was only 4 days and we went to the island of Shikoku. On the island of Shikoku, they took us off and we went through a little, passed through a little town. What a beautiful little town I saw. It's my God, if I could only just get away from here and go right in the middle of that town, get something to eat, I'm so hungry. But it was such a pretty and picturesque town. I always remember that. All the beautiful little lights at night and freezing to death. And they bring us up to a broken down old house over there and they throw some kind of a barracks. And they got some straw, what have you, and everything else threw it there on the thing. Says, you guys, this is your bed. Make to do with what you can here until we get you some uniforms. And it's about 3 or 4 days. But we were eaten up by nothing but cockroaches and bed bugs and whatever came out of those old wooden beds that were in there. But anyway, we finally got a hibachi there and we boiled some water on there and we just killed as many bugs as we could. Man, I'm telling you, I got eaten up by those guys there for about 3 days. But anyway, finally we got into camp and then we got to again to crawl up to the mountains over there, and they wanted us to convert the mountainside into a farm for apples. And we passed another beautiful little town that was just overlooking the ocean. I said, what a beautiful place, but it was right next to an orchard. And as we were passing by the orchard, I'd sneak in there and get some fruit to eat. So thank God I was eating something. But anyway, got up there was nothing to do but pick up rocks and make some kind of a bridge over there, about 100 yards apart, and then there was planting apple trees right in there. I'd like to see those apple trees today. They must be 70 years old by now. Anyway, after we were there for about 3 or 4 months, they started measuring us and measuring our head, measuring our muscles and what have you. And then they started throwing bags on me and top of me and see how far I could run with the bags and all of this sort of thing. And then lo and behold, they shipped us instead to a place called Tanago. There you were really starved to death over there. There was nothing to eat, and you had to go and put dynamite into holes and blow things up. They're building a submarine base over there, and then they load up all these heavy rocks into a dump truck, and then you put the dump truck on rails over the cliff and dump all of those over there. And while I was dumping them down there, I'm running down there with the rocks, going down there to the beach there to see if I could catch some of those rock crabs, and they had some weeds seaweed that they call minori over there. So I'd eat that. Of course, there's nothing but diarrhea every day after that. But anyway, working out there for about 4 or 5 months, and then lo and behold, they shipped us to a place called Yumida. And, oh man, this was great. They were winning the war, and here come all these ships that were coming in over there. They were all loaded up with boxcars and everything. Our object was to unload all the boxcars. Look at that, whoa, look at that food, and then smell everything. Man, they ate like a pig over there. But mostly it was loaded with rice bags. And one day, we were on our way home, and I'd stolen my ration of rice, and I had them in my stocking, and then my shoes underneath the stocking with the rice and all. And on our way to our barracks again, by the Japanese laborers that were there were having a hard time opening up a door to one of their boxcars because the rice and straw bags had pushed up against the door and had stuck the door. So I had put my hand up on it. I was the last guy, and I had my hand up against the metal bar in here, and we were all pulling it, and all of a sudden the door went, and I almost smashed all my fingers here. I almost lost these 4 fingers right here. But then they felt sorry for me, that the Jap soldiers, so they marched me into a doctor. And I went into the doctor, and what did they tell me? I had to take my shoes off first. You know what happened there? I was 6 days in a solitary confinement with an apple on my head, and my hands tied behind my back, and every time a guard would see how I was doing, see the apple was on the floor, he'd start whacking me, you know. And that for 3 or 4 days, and finally I got out of that. And we just continued on working there until the time came. I guess we were winning the war because we started hearing about Guadalcanal and wondering what was taking so long. I kept hearing about Guadalcanal all the time. And then one day, at night, we were looking down at the docks, and boom, crash, boom, boom. Here they were, oh boy, everybody's yelling and screaming. They were really bombing the docks. So I knew we were winning the war for a change. We're winning the war. But anyway, guess what? During all this time, we got about two boxes of Red Cross boxes, if you've heard of those things. And we got about once during the spring and once during Christmas, that's all we get. But about after bombing over there for about 3 or 4 days that they were going over there, they lined us all up. Lucky they didn't knock our barracks down. So they marched us down to the docks and they started cleaning it up. And they opened up this warehouse, and it was in there. Tons and tons and tons. Believe it or not, I was so dang mad, all burnt and everything else. Red Cross boxes.
Oh.
Thousands of them in there. And I said,
But we didn't care, man, we dashed in there and got in there and to see if all we could eat on that too. Of course, we were all sicker than the dog there too. But anyway, got bombed out finally about 6, 7 different times. We were moved from one camp to another. And I was finally put into one camp there. And we heard the air raid going on. And we looked up from right at the warehouse where I was working. And we looked up, and oh my God, from one end of the sky to the other end of the sky was nothing but our plane. They were flying, must have been 100 feet high. Holy mackerel, I said, we've had it. You know, here comes the bombs. I could look up and I could see the bombs coming down, but they weren't bombs, they were incendiary bombs. And when I got out of that place over there in that warehouse there, and I ran under a railroad car, and incendiary bombs were dropping all around me. But luckily we all made it. We didn't get back, so they moved us up north to a town called Pusiki. And there we were working ships because they were getting bombed out by the B-29s. They moved us up about 4 or 5 different times. And we were getting knocked out by the B-29s all the time, and every time they were yelling, oh, we need you to, we need you to, we need you to, and all that sort of thing. And so anyway, they shipped us up to Pusiki, which was another dock, and they were loading up their docks, their ships were full of soybeans. And what can we eat? You can't eat soybeans, you know, you can't eat them raw. You gotta let them get soft. And you know, the only way we could get soybeans, because we're still not even getting any rice. We had to steal bento boxes from the Japanese soldiers once in a while, and then got really mad. We did that. But anyway, you know the way we had to clean up the soldiers' crap houses, and I hate to tell you this, but I gathered up those little soybeans from there because they were nice and soft. Anyway, and that really helped me there. But anyway, we were there until about August 15th, and we were just starving to death down to nothing there, and all of a sudden, we lined us up over there, and guess what? The Emperor came on. I heard his broadcast. And when that happened, they just rushed us right back to camp again. All the soldiers disappeared. And in comes some food from the civilians. They came over and gave us some food. And then we were there for about 2 or 3 weeks, and finally a plane came over and dropped a note and says, right on top of your roof, prisoners of war, 3 OWs. So we did. And the next day here they came again and dropped nothing but parachutes full of food. And then again we ate all that, got sick on our dog. And then about a week later, maybe even then, about 2 weeks, they marched us into the train. And then we went down to, I think it was Kobe or somewhere. And then we went into, believe it or not, to an Australian ship. And oh, what a wonderful sight that was. There was the United States flag over there. Man, the first time we saw that U.S. flag, I said, oh my God, what a beauty. So anyway, they got us on the ship there, and they said, what would you like to eat? And I said, I know what I want. So what would you like? And I said, I would like a gallon of milk. They brought me the milk. And that's all I drank for 3 days, just milk. I didn't want any food. I was so sick, and I couldn't take any food. That milk was great. And then they finally shipped us out, I think, to Tokyo Bay over there. And we got on another, I got onto a plane, and guess what? The plane went right over there and flew right back to Guam. And we got out of Guam, and I went into a barracks of all the American soldiers, and here was all that food laid out on table. I said, oh my God, what? Well, look at this, would you look at this? And then we saw the Japanese soldiers there, and we were all yelling at them, Shigoto, 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 Hayako, Hayako, Hayako. Get to work, we're getting our revenge. And finally, we got onto the airplane, and we flew from Guam, we flew right to Honolulu. And there in Honolulu, we got a pack of cigarettes, and it says, go into Oakland over here and stay there for a while until you decide where you want to go. And that was the end of it.
Wow.
I'm not very much this evening because I don't feel good. But one thing you haven't heard this afternoon is that you people don't speak Japanese. I had to. If we'd let the Japanese through the Philippines, they were going to Alhambra, California, and finish taking over the United States, just like they went through China. And they could have got away with it. The only thing they didn't do is bring enough of people into the Philippines when they come in, and we wiped them out, and they had to wait for reinforcements. I was in the infantry. I know. The Japanese had every intentions in the world of taking over the world. But the few of us, or a lot of us in Bataan didn't see it that way. If they'd have went through, been able to get out of Bataan into towards the United States, there wouldn't have been no way to stop them. Another thing I want to mention is in 45, if it hadn't have been for me, there would have been 500 people in this camp where I was at in whatever the name of this town is that I'm going to in 2 or 3 days. They're going to show me where I was a prisoner of war. I don't remember the name of the place, or either they didn't have a name wrote on the place. But anyway, they were gonna, what was fixing to happen, the Japanese sergeant told his men, Senso wari kino juichiji. That meant one thing to me. And I had studied Japanese and everything else I could study to try to stay alive. Anyway, the next morning, or that night, I told the British major that what I'd heard, but we had to look up one word, and the word we had to look up in the dictionary was unconditional. And anyway, I told the one of the guards that almost beat me to death for saying, "Also disca, is that so?" But and then he asked me why wouldn't I die after he tried to kill me. I said, "God loves me." I saw him the next morning as soon as I could, and I told him, I said, made out like he was a friend. I said, "Tomodachi, Senso wari kino juichiji." His eyes got as big as coffee cups, and he says, "How'd you find out?" I said, "A little bird flew into camp and told us, and then flew back out." If you don't mind, I'm going to stop right and let this little girl here read an article in the paper here that'll tell you a lot of other things about me. I'm about wiped out for the day.
December 7th, 1941 marks a terrible day in American history with the surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. The same day, and with the same fierce ambush, the Philippines incurred simultaneous attacks as World War II raged on in the Pacific. American and Filipino troops fought valiantly for months, but to no avail, losing the Battle of Bataan with a forced surrender on April 9th, 1942. That day, approximately 12,000 American soldiers and 64,000 Filipinos became prisoners of war and made to march in what became known as the Bataan Death March. Sergeant First Class John Mims of Company B, 1st Battalion, 31st Infantry Regiment, was one of those prisoners of war. Mims, 89, of Aberdeen, never imagined joining the Army would land him in the Philippines, much less a prisoner, but joining the Army was all he wanted to do. I was hungry, declares Mims, a full-blooded American Indian who describes himself as the only cotton top on the reservation in Northwest Florida. Sometimes all we had to eat was flour gravy, he laments. Mims was only 13 years old when he first enlisted. Of course, once the Army realized his real age, he was ousted. It wasn't long before he was ready to re-enlist, but this time the world was entrenched in war. The sergeant said, "I know where you need to go, the Philippines." So I was transferred to Angel Island, California, and put on the USS Republic, headed to the Philippines, recalls Mims. There, Mims began intense infantry training out in the unforgiving desert at Fort William McKinley, shooting at incoming planes. We couldn't go to a bar, but we could go to the PX, so we would put a fifth of gin and sarsaparilla in our canteens. That's how we learned to drink, he says with a quick grin. And that may be one of the few pleasant memories Mims had before the brutal attack and battle. The captured soldiers were herded north along a 60-mile route considered to be the most horrific Japanese war crime. Mims was a witness to senseless murder and a victim of torturous acts himself. One Japanese soldier dropped a bottle of Coca-Cola. I picked it up and handed it to him. I didn't bow, though, and he hit me so hard in the face with that bottle of Coke that I spit out blood and teeth, remembers Mims. I have seen fields and fields of nothing but dead bodies. Despite the atrocities of war, his captivity, broken legs, and wounds that Mims endured, he never lost his faith, love of God, love of country, or his will to live. I had an angel holding on to me while my body was getting beat, added Mims. Surviving the march and his brutal POW captivity, he continued his Army career, even serving in Japan, and was married for 57 years until his wife's death in 2003. Had 3 children, adopted 2 more, and fostered 20 more children over his life, leaving quite a legacy. He also has made lecturing and sharing his World War II experiences a priority. As a loyal member of the VFW Post 7318, Mims has been honored as a Grand Marshal in area parades. He and his current wife Nina will make the cross-country drive to a reunion in New Mexico that marks the 69th anniversary of the March, a trip which he fundraises for all year. I'm trying to keep the memory of Bataan alive, he says, which means I get to show how much I love the people I fought for and how much I love America.
I want to say one more thing, that the camp that I was in, we found out after I found out that the war was over, that the Japanese intended to march us into the coal mines where we were slave laborers and blow it up and say it was an accident, so we couldn't testify against them. A lot of other things I should tell you, but I'll have to tell you some other time, the rest of the chapter. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions. If you have a question, you raise your hand. Sato-san will be the first, and then we'll give priority to the students. Sato-san, you raise your hand first. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the enormous opportunity. Me, at the age 65, learned the first thing about the health ship. I didn't know anything about that. I feel guilty and ashamed about that. On the other hand, I have been listening what you are talking about, and I am so impressed to know that you all have the focusing ability that you can talk. I have my father, is age 90, he can continue 5 minutes. You stay focused, and the topics are so interesting. Of course, it is a live show, and I didn't understand anything but the truth of your own experiences. Once again, I would like to thank you very much.
be shy. We know U.S. students are not shy. So here it is, the young man in the back. Walter will give you a mic.
I'm sorry, I'm not a student.
Okay, that's
is that okay?
That's okay.
My name is Brian Cathcart, and I live in Japan. 10 years ago, I did some Fulbright research on World War II, and I interviewed a former prisoner of war, and I think he was American. There were some British people there as well, and he said the atomic bomb saved his life. And this is a tough topic, of course, and I was wondering what, if you would like to answer it, you don't have to, but what, maybe one of you, what were you feeling when you heard about the atomic bomb, and if you have any opinions, please let me know. Thank you.
I'll take the question. I was in the coal mine there, and we knew they dropped the bomb, but there was nothing we could do about it. We couldn't run. Incidentally, I weighed 67 pounds when I finally got out of PW camp. But we took over the camp that I was in myself because of me hearing that the war was over. And I never did say it before, but this Japanese that I told that the war was over, he disappeared right after that. A lot of others disappeared too. But we took over the camp outside after I found out that it was over. Otherwise, they were going to put us in the mine and blow it up, say it was an accident.
We had 2 interpreters in our camp in Mukden, Manchuria, and they very carefully informed us time and time again that if the Americans invade Honshu, you will be executed. We feel that the Americans would have to have invade Honshu, and so we feel, and every one of us is still alive, feel that the use of the devastating bomb probably saved our lives. It's not nice to say that because there's lots of people killed in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but as personal feelings, we up here feel that those bombs saved our lives.
I'd like.
Well, in my case, we never even knew anything about the dropping of the bomb, but we had heard rumors about what had happened to some prisoners who were on Palawan. I don't know if you people have heard about that, where they herded the prisoners, Japanese herded the prisoners and put them in this little cave or something, and then threw gasoline and what have you and everything in there and burned them all up. Well, we heard about that. And also we heard that the Japanese had formed along the coastline, all the way through the coastline of Japan, that they had little would-be time bombs strapped on their backs, that they were going to go and hit every ship that came in close enough to the shores, and they were going to knock the holy heck out of our ships. And in the meantime, they didn't want to have any Americans in back of them, so the first object was to kill every civilian, I mean every POW that was in any camp. Harry Truman made the decision to drop the atomic bomb. The reason he made it was he calculated how many Americans would be killed if we invaded Japan. And there are a lot of books written on this subject. And so, if you read it, he figured the millions or hundreds of thousands of U.S. soldiers would be killed on an invasion. Hundreds of thousands of Japanese people would be killed if they had an invasion. So we decided to drop the first and second atomic bombs. I don't think anybody knew that there was not a third one. The third one was not developed yet, but he dropped the first two, and that caused the Emperor Hirohito to make the decision, he not knowing whether we had any more, but he made the decision to stop the war. And so that saved a lot of lives. You know, the atomic bombs obviously killed a lot, but they also saved a lot.
Amen.
Yes, of course, of course.
I was at Niigata, Japan. Niigata was one of the A-bomb targets. We were the northmost target on Honshu, so that's why we survived. The two closest targets were Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They were never bombed during the war. They wanted to see what kind of damage the A-bomb would do. The A-bomb was a terrible thing. It killed a lot of civilians, unfortunately. It saved a lot of lives, not only American lives, but Japanese lives too. War is never very nice. What happens in wars.
I want to say thank you first. This is an incredible opportunity to be able to hear firsthand your experiences in the war. And I'm currently taking a class here at TUJ that's focus is Japan's occupation of Southeast Asia. And I'm writing a research paper on POW camps, so this is really well timed for me. But one of the things that I've noticed in all of the readings that I've been doing and studies for this class is that Japan didn't have a very organized system when it came to POWs and civilian camps and everything. It doesn't seem like they thought that far ahead. It was taking over and then what do we do now? So from one country to another, the way that they were in charge, the way that they took over was very different. And it sounds like as POWs, you guys were moved around a lot from camp to camp and country to country. Did you find big differences between different places where you were held, or was the treatment fairly standard from place to place? Yeah, the mistreatment, yeah.
The Japanese now are good people, but at the time they had us, the Japanese, I don't know where they were trained, but after they went through China and took all of China, and took all the embassies out of China, the Navy, Marines, and what have you, they figured they could get away with anything. Well, they did, but that was a different kind of people. Now, I come back to Japan after I was released in 1945, after we took over the camp and where I was talking about. I came back to Japan, don't tell me why or how, but it seemed like the good Lord wanted me to. And I was in charge of Tokyo Quartermaster Depot for 2 years. And I had a commanding general that said John Mims was the boss. I had DAC civilians writing surplus property for sale to all countries, and I had to say so of whether somebody got to bid or not. I had a lot of Japanese offer me $100,000 to swing a bid his way. But what was gonna happen if things went wrong? I told him, I said, if I can help you, I'll help you. Otherwise, I don't want no money. Because money will talk and it'll walk and do you harm. And I had a wife and children, and I didn't want to jeopardize my family. Does that answer you?
Let somebody else try, yeah.
Well, I can give you a couple of incidents. I mean, to answer your question, I went from camp to camp. I must have been about 9 or 10 different camps, mostly because of the bombing, and mostly also because if your camp dropped down in the number of personnel in the camp, you usually were moved to another camp to build it up, because they like to have about 400 or 500 men to a camp. But as a rule, you went out to work, you were marched out by the soldiers, and then you were put into whatever place you were going to work, and then the soldiers turned them over to the civilian. And in my instance, I said, like, not all the soldiers were too bad. I can give you a couple instances like I was telling you. But I was working in this one particular place. It was toward the end of the war, about 3/4 of it was almost over. And I was working in a flat car that was loaded with iron ore, and the next car over was loaded with pure sulfur. And I was given a huge shovel like this. And I was weighed about 98 pounds at that time, because it was a matter of starving to death all the time. But anyway, you had to go and stick the shovel into the iron ore. Well, you know how heavy iron ore is. And here I'm 98 pounds. I must have lifted that dang old shovel up with 98 weighing the same as I, and try to lift it up over the rail and throw it out. And I was doing that, but I was getting smart, so I was putting a little bit on the shovel. Next thing I know, here comes a civilian over there, and he gave me a swack right across the face. And I didn't even think about it. I took the shovel and smacked him, and he went over the side of the rail. And then he came out, and believe this is a true story, he came out running after me, and the soldier saw that. He come running after that civilian. He knocked the holy hell out of that civilian and did nothing to me. So that's one incident I want to say.
I've talked to a lot of generals, and they said, Sergeant, you look like you're in pretty good shape. Well, I try to look like I'm in pretty good shape, but my body is disintegrating. My back is where it's been beat and kicked and all kind of mess, is in terrible shape. And my left arm is gone. I still have it, but I can't use it but just a little bit. But thank goodness I've still got it. And the other thing, right here in Japan, they hung me from a yardarm there at the sergeant's place where the guard was, until they broke my neck in 3 places. I was paraplegic twice, but I guess I've got a lot of good help looking after me, because I'm still up and moving. My belief is, if somebody gets in a wheelchair like I was, and they want to stay in there, stay in there. But if they want to get out of it, there's somebody looking after them to help them.
Before the war, the Japanese people used Korean people like slave labor. They had them all over the Marianas Islands raising sugar cane so that the Japanese people could get the sugar. They also treated their own people badly. And if you've read any books, you've read about the rape of Nanking and all the atrocities in the Philippines. And so they had a habit of really treating people badly. During the war, the military police, Kempi-Tai, I think they called them, their military police were the worst of the lot. They had some terrible soldiers, and then I suppose there were some good soldiers. But anyway, and generally speaking, they treated everybody poorly. I grew up in a little town in Redlands. We went to school. We had friends that were Japanese, and we liked them very much. And during the war, President Roosevelt was so afraid of what the Japanese might do or what their people here would do that they put hundreds of them in internment camps out in the middle of the desert, and they had to move there and stay there. And so even our own Japanese in the U.S. Were like prisoners in their own country. It's kind of sad.
You've asked questions. I would like you ask all you folks one question. Did you want to be here tonight?
Yes.
I didn't hear much response.
Any other one? So, Walter, just use someone.
My name is Mark Lang, and I'd just like to say it's you all are part of the greatest generation, and it's quite a privilege for me to be here with students tonight to hear your stories. Not only that, it's amazing. It shows a lot about the human spirit that you can endure so much in such a place and come back with such open hearts. And I just want to say thank you very much for that.
Hi, my name is Oka. I know maybe a dozen Japanese who went to the same war that you went to. Nobody ever talked to me what they did or what they went through during their time in the war. My question to you is, do you talk about the war to your children or your grandchildren?
I didn't understand the question.
Well, do you speak about the war to your children or grandchildren? Because he knows a dozen or so people that very well that never speak to him about what they went through.
I think during the last 2 or 3 years, we've been encouraged to talk about the war. Originally, we didn't talk about the war. So we have, just the last few years, basically.
Yes. Maybe one of the.
And what was the question? I didn't talk about it much because nobody believed what you would tell them. When I first got home, I told my parents what happened, and I said, and we won't go through it anymore. That's it, and it's over with. And I stayed angry for years, but I finally used that anger up, and I no longer have it. And I feel at peace with myself and with the rest of the world. And an earlier question, somebody asked what we thought about when we heard about the atomic bomb having been dropped. Of course, nobody knew that it was an atomic bomb then, but we had been set to digging a tunnel in the mountainside for our new home after our quarters had been burned down in Saluga. And after about a day's work on that, our Japanese guards came and told us, no more work. The Americans have a bomb that makes it unsafe even underground. And the group I was with, our reaction was, why in hell don't they drop some more of them things?
Maybe we'll have one last question, and then, well, you have the mic, so possession is 9/10 of the law. Hi, John.
Hi, Richard. Robert. First of all, thank you very much for coming all the way to Japan, the country where you experienced so much horror. Thank you very much for sharing your stories with us. My question is, during your time as a POW, were there any moments of friendship or generosity from either the Japanese civilians or the commandants who were in charge of you? Were there any moments that you remember of friendship or generosity?
There were several instances in the Mukden camp in Manchuria. One in particular was the interpreter at the factory at MJK. His name was Kai. He would stand up there and harangue us, you dirty no good so-and-so. We know what you're doing. We're going to catch you. We're going to kill you. But never once did he ever raise his hand against an American. Well, later, 3 years ago, we made a trip to China, and Susan Kai, his daughter, went with us. She was looking for closure to her doubts and questions about what happened to her father, and we assured her that her father had not harmed any American. So there were people, and let me assure you that the 2 American interpreters in our camp were probably the most horrible, no-good gentlemen that ever walked the face of the earth. Because they made it very clear, we are going to die, and we don't give a damn what we do to you guys.
Well, I can tell you a couple of incidents, one of them that you probably won't even believe, but anyway, just happened in Yamita. Like I was telling you, the soldiers came in and then turned over us to the people there, who in turn traded us into groups of what they call a honcho, who would have 4 or 5 of us prisoners who would do the work under them. And this man told me that they were having a competition, this honcho, this Japanese honcho. And he says, I know what's going on, but I'm going to be the best. And I'm going to tell you boys how I'm going to be the best. I'm going to tell you, there's a shack over here, there's a little hibachi in there, and you guys are to take turns, one at a time. You're going to be cooking rice in there. I don't know nothing about nothing, but you're going to be cooking rice in there, and you're going to be eating all you can eat. And my God, I mean, that thing worked there for about 3 months. I think that's when I was the most powerful. I think I was going all the way up to 145 pounds in that time of about 6-8 months of that. And I really built myself up, and this guy was always the #1 honcho in that group. And the other incident that I had was the one that I said you won't believe, but we worked in the mountains over there in Sensuji. We were clearing the land over there, and we had a group of women that were working there too, just right alongside of us. And I passed by one, and I looked, and this woman smiled at me. And I went to the bathroom here, over there, and I came right out, and I saw her coming up. And so she kind of
waved to me a little bit and all that sort of thing, but I just went on. I didn't want to get in any trouble. The following day, the woman again had waved a little bit to me and was pointing to the Benjo place over there, which means bathroom. So I went over there, and lo and behold, what was over there? There was a rice ball for me. And this happened for 3 days. But after that, I stayed away because I took my rice ball and I got the heck out of there. I didn't want to take any chances because I had heard that somebody had gotten beheaded before for some flirtation that had gone on. So anyway, that was about after 3 days that I stayed away, and I didn't notice it. I didn't see her anymore after that, so I didn't know whether I should have been counting my blessing or not. I don't know how much longer you wonderful people want to listen to this malarkey, but in one of the places that I was a prisoner of war in Clark Field. How many of you ever heard of Clark Field?
In the Philippines.
In the Philippines. Anyway, I was a prisoner of war there after I almost died in Cabanatuan. And a naval doctor, Nardini, pulled me out of the fire there. I crawled back from the barracks that was supposed to go to the cemetery the next day. All the cemetery was is a place where the bulldozers cleared a thing out and cleared it out, and they'd take bodies there and dump them in the water because it was rainy season. And sometime when they would hit that water off the stretcher that we was taking them up in, they would come alive almost like electric shock. And the Japanese, they bayonet them. They didn't want to waste bullets, but they'd sure bayonet. They'd use those bayonets. And then they'd make the Americans clean their bayonets for them after they did that. But this one particular time in Clark Field, I escaped, and they wanted to punish me for it. They broke both of my legs. They put a bulldozer blade down on my legs and broke them. Well, I thought that was pretty stupid of them because I couldn't cut the grass on the airfield or couldn't drive their trucks for them. Incidentally, the trucks that we drove for them, we'd fill them up full of sand, the tanks, one day and work the next day, taking them down, getting all the sand out. They didn't know that we was doing it. They thought somebody else was doing it. You know, sabotaging their trucks. But anyway, after they broke my legs, they sent me to Manila, the dungeon there. And man, some of the pet rats or whatever they had in those dungeons was big as a dog. Running around in there, and I was scared to death they were going to eat me little by little. But anyway, after my legs healed so I could stand on them, they shipped me to Japan. Now, the way they shipped me to Japan was on this slow boat to China. I thought it was their ship, but I found out in the last week or two that the ship belonged to Canadian, what was it, huh?
Canadian ship owned by the Japanese.
Anyway, the Japanese had took it out of the shipping lanes or something it belonged to Canada, and Japanese had it. And all the time we was on that ship, we was thinking about how can we take over the ship, you know, and run for our lives. Every time we would do that, think about doing that, it'd break down, and we couldn't use a broke down ship. But what was happening, we was on a ship, they was changing guards when they went through China. That's why we knew all about that China deal, because they went through all there and took our embassies out, and the people that they captured, some of them was even guarding us, the prisoners of war. And but to my knowledge, no Korean or any of those people through there that the Japanese had working for them, I don't never know of one of them hurting us or mistreating us. They would never say nothing, but the Japanese is always the ones that did the dirty work. Thank you. I better quit.
Thank you so much for coming. We're extremely happy to have had you here. We're really grateful for everything you've done. This is obviously, I think, the most important and interesting emotional event we've ever had at TUJ this year. Just in closing, if there's any closing statement one of you would like to make, or?
I think we've pretty well made our statement.
Well, thank you very much. Again, we'd like to thank the POW and